Nai-Z of planet Earth. My name is Zaini Ademus, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the life partner hierarchy for the Nai-Z. The life partner hierarchy is sort of like an advanced continuation of the social alchemy groupings that we already talked about. So you saw in the social alchemy episode your inspirational grouping, things like same source recognition. Well, there's also whether or not a grouping is giving you inspiration, augmentation, or suppression. Inspiration would be relationships where your powers are having their inspirational powers to pool your powers and get them to grow more and expand themselves outside of their native shores, but within the channels that are native to them. Augmentation relationships will be with powers that you already have, so some form of Nai and Z that is going to augment your powers. This was already covered in social alchemy, but it's going to be specially focused on here because now we're talking about life partners. And when we talk about life partners, we're talking about two things. The fact that in order to be a life partner, you need to have a complete story. That means all 8 powers need to be represented consciously between 2 people. And it needs to be in such a way that creates a harmoniously complete story. So all 8 powers are represented and they are at the correct levels to link up and create a unified story. And then there's also the fact that this life partner is going to be the most intimate partner for you. So the gender of this person is going to be very important. And the fact that you're going to need to not be competing with this person for the role that you do, because they will be around you a lot. And when in the most intimate levels, all humans need to kind of take a break from just being around themselves, and they need to be completed. And that comes from being around powers that you don't have represented in the right ratios. So the top life partners for you are going to be the ones that give you the most inspiration. And there are 3 of these that form a pyramid. At the apex of this pyramid, there's the Nizai, who also has Ji and Thai. And those 4 powers line up perfectly with your powers. They're the 4 powers that you don't have, and they're in the perfect ratios, which is the Nez channel first, then Zez channel, then Jez channel, then Vez channel. Also very inspiring to you as a Nai-Z is the Nijai, because even though they don't have the same powers that you do as a Nai-Z, they do have a repetition of your Z and your Jai for the discernment, so that's an issue. But it is still very inspiring, as they do have Ni as their source power to go along with your Nai source power. And since it's the source powers that are inspirational, then that does create a lot of inspirational influence. The Zaini is also very inspiring to you as a Nai-Z because they do have Ni and Zai as their top 2 powers, which are the most inspiring powers to you as a Nai-Z. But they're not in the perfect ratio. The perfect ratio would actually be Ni above Zai, and they have Zai above Ni. So they have the Zez channel first and the Nez channel second. So it's a bit off. So it is very inspiring, but it's not ideal. And so this is why the Nijai and the Zaini make the base of the inspirational triangle, and the Nizai makes the apex. Then there's augmentation relationships. Augmentation mojos are mojos that are similar to you. So this would be other Nai-Z, this would be Nai-Ji, and this would be the Z-Nai. But in the context of an intimate life partner, there's going to be an issue that the powers are too similar. So you don't have the full range of 8 powers going on, which is okay in a working relationship, but as far as an intimate relationship and all-pervasive, that's going to be a problem because there's an overlapping with what you do. Like I said, with life partners, then there needs to not be a competition of priority. And so that's why with all the inspirational relationships, you're going to see adaptives paired with directives, and for the most part, objectives paired with subjectives. So they're not competing with each channel, but they're still favoring the same channels. And this is what you want. With augmentation, it's going to be getting your own powers stronger than what they were natively, but not expanding to the other 4. It's important to note that this is a very strong social alchemy, energetically speaking. It's the 3rd or 4th. The augmentations show up in recognition and same source pairings and the inverse pairings. So this actually does create very strong energy. And this is important to note because people often feel that a life partner or intimacy or sexual chemistry or love should feel very powerful and with strong energetic creation. And that could happen without it actually being an ideal inspirational relationship. So this is very important that you understand this concept as a Nai-Z, because you'll have very strong upgrading in energy and confidence by hanging out with other Nai-Z, by hanging out with Nai-Ji, and by hanging out with Z-Nai. This can actually become intimate, but it's more like you're intimate with a person on the job, as if you were a workaholic and you're kind of just hanging out in the office and then just doing what you do all the time, but also sleeping with your coworkers. This may not entirely be a bad thing all the time, and there may even be times where this is actually appropriate in your life. But what you have to understand is this is not actually creating a complete life. It's not ideal, and it does not complete you or your story. A third energetic grouping that should be mentioned here is the suppression trio. This has to do with mojos that are further down from your story, like Shades of Me. As a Nai-Z, this is going to relate to the V-alpha, like the V-Jai and V-Zai, and also the Jai-V. They are very different from you, and this is because their main powers are your modulation powers. Now, there are certain models of thoughts that believe that you should have a suppression partner as your life partner, and the short answer is this is complete nonsense. The rationale behind that is you need to balance each other out, something, something, something. And the reason this is wrong is because a correct life partner math is not simply balancing each other out. And especially in this context, because that kind of pairing up is actually just getting you to modulate each other in ways that is subversive to your peak pathway. You don't need to modulate each other. You actually don't need a partner who modulates you. You have your own modulation powers, and you're designed to modulate yourself. You don't need someone to do that for you. So what you get with inspirational relationships is the inspiration to modulate yourself, the inspiration to reach out on far shores and go places where you never went before, to be inspired to actually go that far. But in the case of suppression, it's not like that. You're not being inspired. You're actually just having another person cancel out your powers. And so that's why the idea that the suppression relationship is ideal is completely absurd. But the suppression trio is an important grouping worth mentioning, because there can actually still be a certain attraction that occurs between these mojos that actually plays out in real life, and it does. So the reason this can happen is that if you're, for example, in a weakened state, maybe the world is kicking your butt, and you're being forced to have to do your modulation powers, have to do Jai or V all the time. So having a person who can handle the Jai and V well can feel good, and this person can feel like they're saving you from it. And so there can be a sense of gratitude and security that might come from this. And this might cause any mojo to feel that a suppression relationship is actually helping them when it's actually not. This can be confusing due to two reasons. One, they are going to be good at stuff that modulates you. So if you're under attack by things where you're constantly having your modulation powers pulled on, and being with someone who modulates you but can also handle this stuff can seem like they're providing kind of a reprieve from you having to do all of that stress-causing modulation. The other thing is that the suppression trio also has a lot of similarities in the way that it looks to inspiration. So as a Nai-Z, you're ideally inspired by the Ni-Zai. Now, the V-Zai is energetically very different as far as the fact that they have V as a source power, which makes them a radically different creature. Although they are still a Zez gatherer, and that has a lot of variations on the same maneuvers. They can be seen in very similar motifs and similar bubbles that you would see Ni-Zai in. So a Nai-Z might actually be confused by the Zez gatherer signal because they seem to be strong at stuff, or good at stuff, or tactical in the way that, in ways that you want in your life, the ways that you understand that your other should have. This is where you're taking stock of someone, but you can't actually read energetically how they are pinging on you. But at first you might be like, I want something that's, you know, really down to things, really into the moment in the way that both of the Zez gatherers are. But if you don't know how to mojo read or judge character, then you might be going with this sort of resume way of doing things. You might even have a lot of common interests or something like that, which can kind of cause you to think that that person is correctly suited for you or your mojo. So this could be something that's very confusing if you don't know how to read energetics, and you might end up thinking that this is something that's good for you. Now there are other groupings as well, such as compensation and partitioning, which covers pretty much all other mojos. All of the mojos we haven't mentioned for the Nai-Z, you could potentially have as an intimate life partner. And in the case of these other groupings, then you'll be doing some variation of keeping them from certain parts of your life. This is what's meant by compartmentalization or partitioning, meaning you actually have to partition this person into just specific parts of your life, because they're not going to be able to do it ideally with you because they are not ideal inspirationals, or when they are, then you have to spend more energy than you should, or you have to do special workarounds in order to just force it to flow. But the relationship groupings that come up the most often are going to be from those three triangles: inspiration, augmentation, and suppression. This relates to the Nai-Z also in mojo reading. The fact that these trios have the most energetic effect on you for different reasons, on a Nai-Z for different reasons. And so this is going to be something that relates to making sure you know how that relates to a romantic or intimate partner, because you are heavily affected by someone. And often that can lead to intimacy, even though that may not be what should happen. But as far as mojo reading goes, early on when you start mojo reading, you're going to need to feed yourself. As your psyche gets fed, then it'll want to do what's feeding it more, especially if it's a good healthy feeding. So when you're doing mojo reading, if you find something that's of interest to your psyche, then it'll be easier for you to get into the mojo reading because your psyche will be able to get more geared up toward it. The signals will also pop out more and be more energetically relevant, and because they're more important to you. They inspire you or augment you, or because they suppress you, making them much more relevant to your storyline. So, know yourself, grow yourself, save the world.